Today we're going to be talking about chapter 13, section 4, and it's titled The Power of the Church. And really we're going to be looking at how church leadership and the political structures of Western Europe compete for power and authority, and how Europe is a collection of these feudal states united by a shared loyalty for the Catholic Church, giving them a lot of power, really. So the church was often referred to as the kingdom of heaven on earth, or Western Europe was often called Christendom as a result. But the power within the church was a hierarchical structure, very much like a political system. There was the Pope at the top, which according to Catholic doctrine, the belief is that the Pope speaks for God, almost like a prophet. And so where there is a discrepancy between biblical dogma, that is the teachings from the Christian Bible, but if there's a discrepancy between that and a statement from the Pope, preference is given to the Pope. And so when the Pope issues a doctrinal statement, it's often called a papal bull, and it's kind of like an executive order, like the Pope declares this is now the interpretation. So for example, when Disney bought Star Wars, they can now do whatever they want with that franchise, and what they are doing moving forward since they bought the franchise is considered canon. And then meanwhile, if you are familiar with that fandom, there's also what's called the extended universe, but that is considered non-canon. So there's a whole separate story about Luke and his wife and Leia and Han Solo, and they're all happy and married, and Luke starts this school and things are going fine. And then there's a second Clone Wars. Well, that's a whole trilogy and a whole series of books that are not considered canon. They're great. I've read them. I recommend them. But they're according to the official narrative, as now defined by Disney. That didn't happen because, well, Disney owns the rights. And so, boom, they can say that. And that's the type of authority, according to the medieval Catholic, that the Pope had, which is an awesome degree of power. But now under the Pope, there are cardinals, there are bishops, there are priests and friars and members of different orders and monks and nuns. It's an entire institution that really serves as the government for Western Europe. And so then meanwhile, there are priests. They're considered very much the people on the ground. But even the word priest has a clear religious meaning, is that the word priest means intercessor, in that to the medieval Catholic, rather than praying directly to God, they confess their sins to the priest. And then the priest intercedes on their behalf and prays for forgiveness for them. And then priests are supervised by bishops who govern or supervise entire regions. And then cardinals would often govern entire, what would become nations. So while medieval Europe, this time between the fall of the Roman Empire and really until the early 1000s, say 1300s through the 1500s, when nationalism was becoming more of a trend, for most of Western Europe for nearly 1,000 years, this is the closest thing to any form of central government that there was. And rather than common oaths of loyalty or allegiance due to where one lives, it's this common belief system that unites people in Western Europe. And it's the requirement that in order to enter the kingdom of heaven, according to a medieval Catholic, they must participate in the sacraments. And so these sacraments such as baptism or marriage through the church or the Eucharist, which some call communion, or even the last rites, which is a really somber thing, that these would be administered to someone when they die. And so if you know someone who is Catholic, and I have family who are Catholic, that is a very important thing, that before they die, they meet with their priest, and the priest gives them the last rites. And so the church is very much a central part of a community, and it's a place where people gather to worship and to celebrate and to participate in these sacraments. And so this is what Catholics often call the Eucharist, or what many call communion. And that's just, or no, excuse me, this is baptism. And In some denominations, people dunk them in water, and some they sprinkle them with water, and some they do this when a child is born, and some they do this when someone is an adult. But either way, the Catholic teaching was that this could only be done through the Catholic Church, and that this outward sign of an affiliation or a connection to the kingdom of God, again, the key there is that it only goes through the church. Well, the church also made, administered, and interpreted their own sets of laws, and these are called canon laws. And so in the sense that just like if something is off canon with a fandom that you participate in, that means that it is really fan fiction, in that it is a story that exists related to but that it's not actual. So, for example, there are many religious works that occurred in the first 500 years of the history of Christianity. Many. There's the writings of St. Augustine. There are some that are known as the Apocrypha, which have questioned legitimacy. And then there are those that are considered canon, the 52 books that the Catholic Church and the Council of Nicaea agreed these are the thing. And then books like the Book of Enoch or the Gospel of Thomas are considered non-canon, or the term they often use is apocryphal. And it's the church in medieval Christian history that defines this, in the same sense that Disney owns the rights. Well, according to medieval Catholic theology, the Pope owned the rights, because from their belief system, and this is just a piece of the New Testament before Jesus died, he turned to Peter, which is the Greek word for rock. His real name was Cephas, and he said, on this rock I will build my church. And so from that, the Catholic doctrine became that Peter was the first pope, and then every pope hereafter spoke on behalf of God. So this gives popes an awesome degree of power, even over political leaders. Kings and emperors had to do what the Pope said. Because, again, according to the Catholic belief system, the one common thing that most Europeans shared, if the king was not in good standing with the church, and if the king was denied the sacraments, which is called excommunication, then that means he could be denied salvation, or he could be sent to hell. And so in the medieval Catholic belief system, the Pope could send someone to hell, or could relinquish that sentence. And even more severely, if a king or an emperor or a political leader refused to obey, there was another practice called interdiction, where the Pope could sentence an entire nation to hell. And so if the Pope did that, and there were a couple of cases where the Pope threatened to, then that, according to their belief system, then per se everyone in France would go to hell if the Pope decided. And so obviously the people of France would not stand for that. And so the kings knew that if the Pope threatened to send an entire nation to hell, the people would just kill the king and replace them with someone loyal to the church. And so what this meant was that for 1,000 years, the church was not only a religious institution, but rather a political power, and really the remnant of the Western Roman Empire. So this means that whether we're talking France and the Carolingian dynasty, or later Great Britain and Alfred the Great, who first united the English kingdoms against the Danes, or even in Central Europe, really Germany was just a collection of these different feudal principalities and city-states and so forth, except through loyalty, shared loyalty to the Catholic Church, there was a sense of political unity. And one of the first rulers in Germany to use the help of the church to unify Central Europe was a person named Otto I, also known as Otto the Great. Crowned king of Germany in 936, and the big power struggle here, the trouble or transition with ending feudalism was that you have these nobles who have the castles, and you have the peasants who are loyal to them, and the knights who fight for them. And the loyalty is with the nobility because of this ancient arrangement of safety and protection in return for service. And then nobles held that real power over their people and did not want to give up that power to a king. And so the church would often help the process of nationalism by helping these monarchs limit the power of the nobility. Because all the Pope had to say was that noble in Bohemia is going to hell. And then from that belief system, the people of Bohemia would kill that noble and then replace them with someone loyal to the church, who would then be loyal to the king on the church's behalf. And so this gave the church power. The church, or the Vatican, as it's now called, had no true military. I mean, they do have a Swiss Guard that carries around a symbolic and real role in providing security for the Vatican City. But in this time, the church called out to Germany and said, we need you to send an army. And so Germany, knowing that they owed their loyalty to the church, invaded Italy on the Pope's behalf, and in return, the Pope crowned Otto emperor of the Roman, or the Holy Roman Empire, rather. So this united Italy and Germany into what was called the Holy Roman Empire. And this power was maintained for centuries. And so here's a map showing the Holy Roman Empire. And really all that's left of it today is the Vatican City in Rome. So once the church controlled all of this as their kingdom, and it even extended at times into France or into other places. Now, this practice of interdiction, probably the closest, and this is really kind of the nuclear option for a pope, and the closest this ever came to actually happening was a disagreement over who got to pick the church leadership within a country. And so King Henry IV wanted to be the person who picked the bishops who would govern the church in his kingdom. And the church, meanwhile, maintained that no, only the church could pick church leaders. Well, Henry wanted to pick church leaders who would be loyal to him, who would not try to tell him what to do. And the Catholic Church, meanwhile, said, no, only the Pope gets to pick bishops and cardinals. So Henry went so far as ordering the Pope to resign. And the Pope excommunicated Henry IV. Well, the people of Henry's kingdom would not stand for this. Because if he were denied the sacraments, then that would mean they would be denied the sacraments. If they were denied the sacraments in their belief system, they would go to hell. And so they forced Henry to go to Italy to beg the Pope for forgiveness. In fact, he had to crawl through the streets. He had to kiss the ring publicly and beg, meaning to humiliate himself in front of an entire city. And then everybody told everybody. And it was a power struggle. And the Pope won because medieval Catholics believed that if they were denied the sacraments, that they would go to hell for eternity. So in the end, the Pope forgave Henry. But he established dominance. It still didn't really solve the problem of who picks church leadership. So in the end, a compromise was reached. And the compromise was that the Pope would pick church leaders like bishops, but that the emperor would have a say. They could have veto rights, if you will. Now another example. In 1152, Frederick I became the king of Germany and did so by dominating all of the German princes. Again, the nobility, the struggle there between nobles and monarchs, is very akin to the struggle between states and the federal government. It's the same story, really. Well, Frederick ruled by force. No one messed with him. He would punish them severely. But anytime he left Germany for any reason, the nobles would rebel because they hated him. Well, when Frederick began to lose, and of course, particularly when he died, the empire dismantled. And that's because leaders who rule by force alone, they are either killed and lose their power early, or the empire falls apart and collapses because it's a cult of personality. So meanwhile, the German kings after Frederick, because there was a dynasty there, kept trying to restore the empire, kept trying to rebuild the Holy Roman Empire. But German princes, meanwhile, preferred their autonomy, and they wanted instead to elect their kings. And that way they would have power over them, because if the nobles picked their kings, then that means they could get rid of them if they wanted to.